Today I'm going to tell you a story about aviation where nothing seemed dangerous, and that's exactly why no one stopped it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Two large passenger planes were on the same runway, hidden in thick fog. Neither crew could see what was ahead, so they had to rely on the radio. Moments later, that connection would fail. One crew believed they had permission to take off, while the other aircraft was still directly in front of them. What followed was not a dramatic error, but a quiet misunderstanding that no one fully realized in time. It would become the deadliest aviation disaster in history. On March 27, 1977, air traffic across the Canary Islands was moving normally. Passengers were boarding flights, crews were following routine procedures, and nothing suggested that anything unusual was about to happen. But at Las Palmas Airport, a small explosion forced authorities to suspend operations temporarily. As a result, incoming flights had to be diverted quickly to nearby airports, including one on the island of Tenerife. That airport was Los Rodeos, a facility located at a higher elevation and known for rapidly changing weather conditions. It was not designed to handle large numbers of wide-body aircraft at the same time. Within a short period, the airport became overcrowded. Aircraft were parked along taxiways, on aprons, and in any available space that could accommodate them. This heavy traffic made ground operations much harder than usual. Pilots and controllers had to adjust quickly, often working with limited options and changing plans as they went. Among the diverted flights were two Boeing 747s, the largest passenger aircraft in service at the time. One belonged to KLM and the other to Pan American. Each aircraft carried hundreds of passengers, most of whom were simply waiting for the delay to end. For them, it was an inconvenience, not a warning. As the delay continued, the KLM crew made a decision to refuel while on the ground. This would save time later, but it also meant staying longer at an already crowded airport. At the same time, crews were becoming aware of duty time limits and scheduling pressures. These factors, while routine, can subtly influence decision-making in high-pressure environments. As the afternoon progressed, weather conditions began to deteriorate. A thick fog started moving across the airport, reducing visibility more and more. At times, pilots could barely see beyond a short distance in front of them. Visual awareness was almost entirely replaced by reliance on radio communication. Eventually, Las Palmas Airport reopened and flights began preparing to depart from Tenerife. However, due to limited infrastructure, the airport had to use its main runway for both taxiing and takeoff. Both the KLM and Pan Am planes had to use the same runway to move forward. This was not common, but at that moment, it felt like the best option. The plan required precise coordination. The Pan Am aircraft would taxi down the runway and exit at a designated point, clearing the path for departure. After the runway was free, the KLM plane would move into place and start takeoff. Everything depended on good timing and clear radio calls. However, due to the fog, the Pan Am crew had difficulty identifying the correct exit. They passed the intended turn and continued moving along the runway. From the control tower, visibility was also limited. Without ground radar, controllers could not precisely track the aircraft's position. As communication continued, the KLM crew contacted the tower to confirm readiness for departure. The response they received included instructions for after takeoff, but did not clearly state that takeoff was authorized. At the same time, radio transmissions overlapped, creating interference. Important messages were partially blocked or unheard. Inside the KLM cockpit, the captain interpreted the situation as clearance to begin takeoff. This interpretation was not confirmed clearly, but it felt consistent with the conversation. The first officer expressed slight hesitation, but the moment passed quickly. The aircraft was already aligned and ready. The KLM aircraft began accelerating down the runway, gaining speed in the thick fog. Visibility ahead remained extremely limited. At the same time, the Pan Am aircraft was still moving forward on that same runway, unaware that takeoff had begun behind them. Suddenly, the Pan Am crew noticed the lights appearing through the fog. At first, it was unclear what they were seeing, but the realization came quickly. They understood that another aircraft was approaching at high speed directly toward them. The Pan Am pilots attempted to turn off the runway as quickly as possible. Their movements were urgent, but space and time were extremely limited. Meanwhile, the KLM captain attempted to lift the aircraft off the ground earlier than planned, trying to avoid what was ahead. The plane lifted off for a moment, but it was not high enough to pass over the other aircraft. It struck the Pan Am jet, leading to a devastating impact. Both aircraft were severely damaged within seconds. The scale of the event was unlike anything aviation had seen before. Emergency response efforts began immediately, but conditions were extremely difficult. Visibility, fire, and debris made rescue operations complex. A small number of passengers from the Pan Am aircraft managed to escape. However, the overall loss of life was significant. Investigators from multiple countries worked together to understand what had happened. Flight recordings and communication logs became critical evidence. It was determined that the KLM aircraft did not receive explicit clearance for takeoff, despite the crew believing otherwise. The disaster was not caused by a single mistake. It was the result of multiple factors, including unclear communication, environmental conditions, and human decision-making. There was no ground radar, and radio signals were not always clear, which made the situation more risky. At the same time, the captain had the final say, which affected how decisions were made. In response, aviation authorities introduced major changes. Communication protocols were standardized, requiring clear and unambiguous language for critical instructions. Training programs were developed to improve teamwork inside the cockpit, encouraging open communication between crew members regardless of rank. Today, this event is still remembered as an important lesson in aviation. It shows how a series of small mistakes can lead to a very serious outcome.